Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Kevin.
And I'm Jill.
And today we're going to talk with you a little bit about the life of the pioneers. Now when you think about pioneers, you probably think of a lot of different things in your mind. You might think about covered wagons, horses, maybe even oxen, maybe a trail that took people all the way across our country. But today we want to talk to you a little bit about the pioneers that came right here to Minnehaha County, the place where we live today. Now these pioneers came from all kinds of different places. Many of them came from back east, from states I'm pretty sure that you've heard of before. States like New York, and Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. You've heard of those, right? Well, they came from a lot of other places as well. In our country, every 10 years we need to count everybody up. It's called the census. We want to find out how many people live in the United States. And you can learn a lot from those censuses because what they do is they ask a lot of questions. And we've taken a look at some information that was put together from some of the different censuses that were taken in different years. We have specifically looked at information from the 1890 census. In the 1890 census, they found that right around 30% of the people that were living right here in Minnehaha County were immigrants. Now think a moment. What is an immigrant? An immigrant is somebody who's born in one country and moves and goes to live in a different country. So we found out that 30% of the people living here in Minnehaha County hadn't even been born here in the United States. They'd been born in a different country. So that would mean if we had 10 people in a room, we would expect that at least 3 out of the 10 people hadn't been born here. Well, you have to think a little bit, where did these immigrants come from? So we looked a little closer, and we found that almost half of them were from just one country. Now we got to think a little bit about this. This country is all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, all the way over in Europe. This country is all the way up in Northern Europe. The first letter in the name of that country is the letter N. Did you get it? It is the country of Norway. How many of you maybe have Norwegian ancestors? Well, we have to think, how did people who were living all the way over in Norway, way at the end of the 1800s, how did they hear about coming here to Dakota? Well, Jill's got some stories for us today. Now, you know that some stories are true and some are made up. Well, these are true stories. They come from journals and letters and diaries from people who actually came here to Dakota at that time and were real pioneers. I want you to listen to this first story. This first story is about how people in Norway were hearing about coming to Dakota. Now listen closely because they're telling people you should come to Dakota because of 2 reasons. Give a listen.
Railroad agents were working throughout Norway to advertise Dakota in glowing terms. They spoke of its untold wealth in gold and rich soil and urged all who would listen to come to this great country and make their fortunes. My father sold our home, and all 7 of us set sail for America. After 3 weeks of being bumped around by ocean storms, we reached New York City, where all immigrants were herded off to Castle Gardens, which is now known as Ellis Island. We all got on the train there for Dakota. After reaching the end of the rail line, we rode in a lumber wagon and forded the James River. We went to stay with the Anderson family, who had arrived a few weeks earlier. Their tiny shanty was just big enough for us all to eat in, so for several weeks both our families shared their large tent for sleeping. During these weeks, my father was building a house and digging a well. It was slow work as Mother and Dad did it alone. The house was built half on Dad's land and half on my brother's adjoining land because homestead law said each had to sleep on his own land. We shared the well and the barn.
Did you hear it in there? Why were people wanting to come to Dakota? One of the things I think you heard in there was gold. Does anybody have a gold mine in their backyard? I doubt it. But is there gold here in Dakota? Absolutely. If you went all the way out to the Black Hills, that's a place where you could find gold. But it's the other thing in that story that people were very interested in, and that was land. Most people at this time were farmers, and land was very important to them. And they wanted to come to Dakota because our government was giving away free land. Would any of you like free land? I sure would. And they're not giving away just a little bit of free land. They're giving away 160 acres of free land. How much land are we talking about here? Well, I want you to picture in your mind, I want you to picture a football field. Have you got it? A football field is about 1 acre of land. So they were giving away 160 football fields worth of free land. Now how many of you would like free land? I sure would. That would be great. But as we know in life, nothing is really free. If you wanted to get the land, you had to follow the rules. The law that was giving away the land was something called the Homestead Act. Under the Homestead Act, you had to live on your land for 5 years. Also, you had to build a house on your land. You had to start farming your land. You had to make general improvements. After the 5 years, if you had followed all of the rules, you got your free land for a small filing fee of just $18. Should we give this a try? See how we could get our free land? So we've got to first travel all the way to Dakota. So we're going to pack up all of our things in Norway. Now we're going to probably pack a trunk to put those all in. Now who gets to pack the trunk? Do you get to pack the trunk, or does Mom and Dad get to pack the trunk? Yeah, you're right. Mom and Dad get to pack the trunk. They get to decide what was going to go in there. Maybe you got a backpack or a bag that you're going to take along with us. So you're going to pack your belongings and you're going to get on a ship. You might be several weeks out on the Atlantic Ocean, going up and down and up and down, until finally you see land and you pull into New York City, to a place that was called Castle Gardens. We know it better today as Ellis Island. They're going to stamp you through. Welcome to America. Now you've got to get all the way to Dakota. So you're probably going to get on the railroad and you're going to chug across the country, but finally you'll get to the end of the rail line. Then you're probably going to have to get into a wagon and you're going to head out onto the prairie. That might be several days, that might be several weeks until you get all the way out to where your free land is going to be. So now we've got our land, we're to our place, but now how long are we going to have to live here? We're going to have to live here 5 years. And what is our first job we need to do? We need to build a house. Boys and girls, I need you to tell me, is this a true or a false statement? All pioneers live in log cabins. Think about that for a moment. Is that a true or a false statement? That is a false statement. If you were going to build a log cabin, what would you need a ton of to make? You would need lots of trees to have lots of logs so you could build a log cabin. But we're out here in the middle of the prairie. Do we see any trees? We sure don't. But what do we see miles and miles of? Just waving grass in the wind. So they're going to have to do something a little bit different to build their house. And one of the first houses that our pioneers are going to want to build is something called a soddy, or a sod house. Now the sod is the prairie grass, and it's hard-packed earth and the roots that you're going to cut up in strips. You're going to lay it up just like you might lay up Legos, all right, or bricks in the walls. That's going to become the walls of your house. You'll lay rails across the top, and you'll lay some more sod on the top of it, all right, and you are then going to have your house. I've got a picture of a sod house. Now this picture is taken right here in Minnehaha County, just west of Sioux Falls, near the town of Hartford. Jill, can you share a story with us? What was it like to live in one of these sod houses?
When the prairie grass was lush in the summer, sod was plowed up with which to build the house. Sod houses were comfortable, warm in the winter and cool in the summer. But they had one drawback. The roof, being made of plain boards covered with tar paper, sod, and clay, after a time did not shed water very well. Many were the times we were awakened at night by Mother setting tin pans on our bed and on us to catch the drip. Often the pans were overturned when we fell asleep or even moved. And sometimes after a long rain, the only dry spot in the house would be under the table. I still feel the thrill of appreciation for a good roof in the rainy weather.
Ooh, okay, that doesn't sound too bad. All right, warm in the wintertime, cool in the summertime. But boy, it doesn't sound fun when it rains out there. You might wake up in the middle of the night and your mom is putting pans on your bed to catch all the drips coming through the roof. And the only place that's dry in your house when you wake up the next morning is underneath the kitchen table. Well, that sure doesn't sound very fun at all. But that was a very popular style of home for the pioneers out here on the prairie. Now, if you didn't choose to build the soddy, you might actually try to live underground. What you would do then is you would dig into the side of a hill, and that is going to become 3 walls of your house. You'll lay up more sod for the front wall, again lay those rails and some more sod across the top, and then you could live underground. That was called the dugout. Let's hear a story about living in a dugout.
This story you might recognize. It might be from a book you've read. Ma picked up Carrie and said, "Come, Mary, let's go look at the dugout." Jack got to the door first. It was open, so he looked in, and then he waited for Laura. Laura went into the dugout. It was one room, all white. The earth walls had been smoothed and whitewashed, and the earth floor was smooth and hard. There was a small grease paper window beside the door, but the wall was so thick that the light from the window stayed near the window. That front wall was built of sod. Mr. Hanson had dug out his house, and then he had cut long strips of prairie sod and laid them one on top of another to make the front wall. Ma was pleased. She said, "It's small, but it's clean and pleasant." Then she looked up at the ceiling and said, "Look, girls, the ceiling was made of hay. Willow bells had been laid across and their branches woven together, but here and there the hay that had been spread on them showed through." They all went up the path and stood on the roof of that house. No one could have guessed it was a roof. Grass grew on it and waved in the wind, just like all the grasses along the creek bank. "Goodness," said Ma, "anybody could walk over this house and never know it's here." But Laura spied something. She bent over and parted the grasses with her hands, and then she cried, "I found the stovepipe hole! Look, Mary, look!" They could look right down into the whitewashed room under all that grass. Did you recognize the story? Maybe you've heard of Laura Ingalls Wilder. It came from one of her books on the banks of Plum Creek. Have you read that book? Her experiences were similar to a lot of other pioneers here in Dakota.
So that's another house that we might want to live in as a pioneer. Now, when the railroad got closer, you could buy lumber from the railroad, and then you might build another type of house. And that's something that we call the claim shanty or the tar paper shed. And I've got a photo of one of those too. Now, the claim shanty was made of cut lumber and it was wrapped in the tar paper. Now today, tar paper would be something that we would put underneath the shingles on our roof. But if you wrap the outside of your home in that, that would help keep the wind and the rain out of your home. Now this becomes a really nice home for pioneers. Many of them said it was pretty easy to keep that dry. Ooh, but they said it was really cold in the wintertime. But this is another really good house for the pioneers. And this one was also located here in Minnehaha County, near the town of Brandon. So our goal, once the railroad came, was to get enough lumber so that we could build a nice house. And I've got a photo of one of those. Now, this house would have real walls, real windows, a real roof on it, and it would be a nice, comfortable house to live in. This house is under construction just north of the town of Colton, here in Minnehaha County. And the goal here would be that you would live in this house for a long time and you can make additions to them. And if you drive around in our county today, sometimes you'll still see some of these houses at farms. Sometimes they might be in a grove of trees and the family isn't using it at all. But sometimes these houses are still being used by the family. And they're one of the first houses that people lived in after they gave up things like the sod house, the dugout, or the claim shanty. But if we do all this, we followed the rules. Because our rules said we had to live here for how long? 5 years. We had to build a house. Our next rule is that we had to start farming. Now, in Minnehaha County today, we have lots of farms, and there are 2 main crops that we grow in the county today. One of those crops is corn. Can you think of the other crop? The other crop is soybeans. Now, I first want to talk a little bit about corn. The pioneers grew corn, and they knew corn would grow because of corn that looks like this. Maybe you've seen corn like this before. Now, this corn we often will call Indian corn, because many of the native tribes that lived here in Dakota, they grew corn. All right, so pioneers, when they came to this area, knew that corn would grow. So they decided to put in a crop of corn. And you probably would recognize that corn looks like this. So this is a nice ear of corn, but the pioneers might have some different varieties. They might grow something called Ponca gray corn. That's kind of weird. All right, not many of our foods are gray. They might grow corn that looks like this. Are you ready for your gross name of the day? This is called Bloody Butcher corn. All right, notice it's got kind of a red color to it. Now our last corn is one that is kind of strange. Have you seen something like this before? Can you guess what it might be? Some of the guesses that we get are sweet corn, corn on the cob, and it technically is corn on a cob. One of my favorite guesses is when people call it carrot corn, because it kind of looks like a carrot that you just plucked from the ground. Did you figure it out yet? Do you need a hint? You might have enjoyed this corn if you went to see a movie. Yeah, now you've got it. It's popcorn. And many of the pioneers might put in a crop of popcorn, something that they might be able to eat. So corn is certainly going to be popular. But corn isn't the #1 crop that pioneers wanted to put in, and neither was that popular crop today, soybeans. It was something else. It was a crop of wheat. Now, wheat is very, very important, because if we're able to grow a crop of wheat, we can grind it into flour. Now, flour is something that we call a staple. It is something, an ingredient in food that makes its way into almost all of our foods. So you might enjoy flour in things like cakes and cookies and brownies and donuts, all those things that we love to eat. So it's very important to get your crop of wheat in so that you can get flour. Jill, can you share a story with us? What was it like to put in our first crop of wheat?
The first summer, Dad hired a man with a yoke of oxen to come and plow the few acres that were required by homestead laws. The next summer, we harvested our first crop of wheat. Dad hired a man who had an old-fashioned reaper to cut it and bundle it. The threshing was done by a tiny machine run by horsepower. A man sat in the center and drove several teams of horses around in a circle. Another man had to stack the straw, and a third to tie the bundles. Every fall, Dad loaded several sacks of wheat on the wagon and left before dawn for the nearest mill. He would return quite late at night with our whole year's supply of flour.
So we're going to put in our crop of wheat, all right? When it's ripe, we're going to harvest it, we're going to bundle it, and then we're going to send it through a machine called a thresher. And what that's going to do is it's going to separate the little kernels of wheat out of the heads here, and it's going to send those one way. And all of the straw and everything else is going to go the other way. So then we're going to end up with several sacks of wheat. Our next step is then to take that to a mill. Now, a number of mills were built along the Big Sioux River, or any watercourse that might be used to run all of the machinery. Have you ever been to Falls Park here in Sioux Falls? Have you seen the ruins of the Queen Bee Mill? Well, that was a mill that was built using the water power to grind area wheat into flour. So they're going to grind up all of that flour, all of this wheat into flour, and then they're going to take that home. That might be their entire year's supply of flour. Now, do you think they could get in a bad situation if they don't get their wheat to a mill? I think so. Let's hear a story about a family that didn't get their wheat to the mill.
The first year on our claim, my family raised enough potatoes and rutabagas for our own use. We also had a cow which supplied sufficient milk for our needs. However, the following winter was exceedingly cold and the snow was very deep, which prevented us from getting our supplies. Consequently, we had no meat, no sugar, no coffee, no flour, or other staple foods. But we lived approximately 3 months on muffins and pancakes made from wheat which we ground ourselves on a hand coffee mill. This grinding was a very slow process, kept one person busy most of the time. We also had our potatoes, rutabagas, and milk.
That sounds like a tough time. Now, did you hear how they made their flour in there? Think back to what Jill just read. They used something else. They used a coffee grinder. Now, this isn't a coffee grinder probably like one you have at your house today, that you plug in and push a button and you get nice ground coffee. They were using an appliance that looked like this. This is a hand coffee grinder. And what they would do is they would load wheat into the top of it, they would turn the crank to grind it, and then all of your flour would end up in this little drawer down here. Now I've put some wheat into our grinder, and I'm going to give it a try. Let's see how this goes. We're all done. We should have some nice white fluffy flour, right? Well, let's open the drawer and take a look. Now that is what we're left with. Is that white fluffy flour? Is that just like the bag of flour your mom might buy at the store? No, it's not. And I'll tell you, it's been through our coffee grinder several times. So this is going to have to go through the coffee grinder many, many times. Also, is this enough flour to make a loaf of bread? It sure isn't. So you're going to have to keep grinding and grinding just to get enough flour for your family so that you can survive. And in our story we heard that they lived 3 months on pancakes and muffins they made from this really coarse flour. All right, now you might have thought this looked like fun. Oh, I would sit there and grind all day, but I think you would probably get bored after a while. And it was the same for the pioneers. And one family came up with a great idea to decide who would do all that grinding. Let's listen.
We had plenty of wheat, so the men in our family played pinochle to decide who should have to grind the next batch. It had to be ground in the coffee mill, so it took a lot of grinding to supply a sufficient amount of flour for a very large family. There was no yeast, but Father remembered grandmother's salt-raising bread, and we learned to make that.
So what did you hear in there? What did they do? You're right, they played something called pinochle. Have you ever played pinochle? Do you know what that is? It's a card game. And whoever lost at cards had to sit there and grind all of that wheat for the family to make their flour. Doesn't sound fun at all. But if we go through all this, we are again following our rules. Because our rules said that we had to live here for 5 years. We had to build a house. We had to start farming. The next part is just surviving the rest of those years, all right, that we needed to on our claim. Now, what season of the year do you think might have been the hardest for the pioneers? All right, do you think that might be summer, fall, winter, spring? I think it's going to be winter. Winter was a very tough time for the pioneers. Now, especially in the winter, you're going to want to keep your house warm. Now, many pioneers in our history have burned lots of wood in fireplaces or stoves to keep warm. But let's go all the way back to what we were first talking about. We're out here on the prairie. Do we see any trees? No, we sure don't. So we don't have wood. We don't have logs to burn in our fire. So what are we going to burn? What are some of your guesses of things that you might want to burn in your stove to keep warm during the winter? Well, I've got some examples here that I want to share with you. All right? One of the things we might be able to burn is we might be able to burn the grass. And this is called a hay twist. You're going to take the long prairie grass, you're going to twist it up, all right, and you're going to feed this into your cook stove. And that might help keep you warm. Now, I've got something else. And this is something that has been used for a very, very long time. And it is this thing right here. Does anybody recognize it? Think about it for a moment. Now, many of the Native Americans might have used this to heat their teepees out here on the prairie. This is buffalo poo. All right, and the pioneers, they called it the buffalo chip. All right, and you might get sent out onto the prairie to pick these up and get a sack of buffalo chips for your mom so she can put them in the cook stove. That sounds really weird. All right, and after that, you probably have an animal on your farm, maybe a cow or some oxen, and you might be sent out into the pasture to pick these up as well. My advice to you would be make sure to poke it with a stick, make sure that it's dry before you try to pick it up. So they might use the buffalo chip. Seeing a lot of pioneers are putting in a crop of corn, we have the corn cobs. All right, and these burn really great in your cook stove. My last piece is something you might be familiar with, and that is a lump of coal. Jill, can you share a story? What was it like to heat our homes with these pioneer fuels?
Our county was like most of the Dakotas, barren of natural fuel except the buffalo chip of the Indian days, or its successor, the cow chip from the pastures of the settlers. Although some made use of the long, tough hay, which was made into tight twists to burn in the cook stoves. We filled our hay burners with either straw or hay. They burned with a fierce heat. The burner got red hot, and so did the stovepipes. Few got coal in those early years, except maybe a jag to be used during blizzards, very cold spells, or emergencies. The kitchen was usually the only warm spot in the house, and the beds, brr. The hot brick, soapstone, or sack of oven-heated oats were common comforters in those icy beds.
This sounds like it's tough. No central heating. It is hard to keep these houses warm. Now, winter is a really tough time too because we get a lot of bad storms in the winter. Do you remember what those storms are called? It begins with the letter B. Did you guess blizzard? Absolutely. It's a blizzard. Now today, how do we know that a blizzard is coming? Maybe we check our phone, or we watch the TV, or we're listening to the radio. We have lots of warning today that a blizzard is coming. But did the pioneers have that warning? They sure didn't. Do you think they could get in a bad situation because they didn't know a blizzard was coming? Absolutely. Jill, let's hear a story of a family that had no idea that a blizzard was coming.
Mother had washed that day, and she spread the clothes on the grass and left them overnight to dry. She was awakened in the night with something cold and damp sifting onto her face. Upon investigation, she discovered it was a blizzard, and for 3 days it raged on and on. Mother was alone with her 4 children, as Father had been working several miles from home. Each night, Mother brought the cow in from the prairie pasture to picket her by 2 huge haystacks stacked for winter use. When the blizzard struck, the cow moved in between those 2 stacks of hay, and there Mother found her after the storm was over, alive and none the worse for being covered with ice and snow during the blizzard. Mother donned a pair of Father's overalls and somehow or other managed to get the cow out of her snowy prison and brought her into our sod shanty, where she became a real member of our family for the time being. And such a grateful animal no one ever saw before or since. Those haystacks continued to serve us as they were the means of our fuel supply through that long winter. And what became of Mother's wash? The next spring, when the snow finally melted away, there it was, just where she had spread it out on the grass so many months before.
That does sound rough. So let's go through that story. So Mom does the wash, and she lays it out on the grass, and it's going to dry overnight. She goes to bed, and during the night, she feels something cold blowing in on her face, and she realizes it is snow because there is a blizzard raging. How long did it rage? That's right, 3 days. Now, When that 3 days was up, she decided they needed to go out and find the most important thing that they owned. What was that thing? It was the cow. So she trudged out in the snow and she found the cow all covered in snow and ice. And what did she do with that cow? That's right, she brought it into the house. And they lived with that cow for a while. I don't know that I'd want to do that. So at the end of the story, when did she find her wash? She found it all the way in the spring, probably needing another washing. Well, I don't know that that's a fun way to live. So what we need to understand is this pioneer experience was something that was very, very hard. Now in the summer, things don't necessarily get any better. All right? Sometimes there's those long periods where it doesn't rain, and then we start thinking of a D word, drought. All right? And sometimes we think we see big rain clouds coming in on the horizon, but it wasn't rain clouds at all. Let's take a listen.
One day we thought it was raining, but instead of drops of water rattling on our roof boards, it was grasshoppers. We looked at our little garden and potato patch, and it wasn't long before everything was taken slick and clean all around us. We had 60 acres of wheat sowed, but we only harvested 13 bushels more than we seeded. After devouring every green living thing in their path, the hoppers would attempt to gnaw the wooden handles off our farm tools. We watched helplessly as they went after fences, curtains, furniture, and even our clothing.
Grasshoppers. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of grasshoppers. And they would come in just huge clouds, and they would land and they would start eating. And they would eat everything. They would eat the crops out of your field, the vegetables out of your garden. They would start gnawing on the curtains on your windows, the harness on your animal, the handles on your tools. One pioneer story that I've read said that you and we couldn't have a discussion because if you opened your mouth, a grasshopper might fly into it. Grasshoppers. Absolutely horrible. Now, we also use another name sometimes for the grasshoppers. They were called locusts. And the year 1874 was really bad for the grasshoppers. They actually called it the year of the locusts, where they think over 1 trillion grasshoppers were out here on the prairie, and they were eating everything, and it was so bad for the pioneers that it actually stopped westward movement. People stopped coming out here because the grasshoppers were so bad. Now that grasshopper that did all of the damage out here on the prairie was called the Rocky Mountain locust. And that grasshopper is extinct today. Do you know what extinct means? Extinct means that there are no more of them. So that grasshopper is gone and we aren't worrying about them now. But boy, this sure sounds tough. All right. Now, not only did you have to worry about all of the things that we've talked about so far, but you also had to have this entire experience while being dressed rather funny. And Jill and I came today dressed as pioneers may have dressed. Now, as a guy, I'm going to spend a lot of time outdoors. All right. So I'm going to wear heavy jeans, okay, to protect my legs. And probably some sort of heavy leather shoe or boot, okay? Now, my pants are actually held up by my suspenders, and those are an important piece as well. I wear long sleeves to protect my arms, all right? And I also wear a vest. This helps insulate my core and keep me warm. Now, when it does start to cool off and in wintertime, I'm probably going to wear some sort of coat. Now the coat that I'm putting on here is kind of a canvas coat, and this is going to keep the dirt and other things off of me, but it's also going to help keep me warm. Now a very important piece that I'm going to need to wear is a hat. And this is the style of hat that I might wear. Now the hat is going to protect my face and my neck from the elements, from the sun, from the rain, from the snow. But it's also going to help keep my body heat in, and that's important too. So when your parents are telling you make sure to wear a hat in the wintertime, they want you to stay nice and warm, and wearing a hat is going to help do that. Now, obviously Jill is dressed different than I am, but she's dressed that way for a lot of the same reasons.
So a little more than the men, the women were slave to fashion. You all like to wear what's in style, right? Yeah, I know you do. Well, what was in style for women was dresses, skirts, all the way to the floor. Under my skirts, I have some layers. In the summertime, they'd be nice and light. They'd help hold away my skirts, keep me a little cooler. But in the winter, I could put on warmer layers, maybe even quilted layers to help hold in my body heat. Over my dress, I have an apron. That helps to keep me clean. My apron even has a little flap. I can lift it up, pin it onto the top of my dress if I'm doing something really messy like baking, and it'll help keep my dress clean. Because I don't have a whole closet full of clothes like we do today. Pioneers maybe had 2, 3 outfits, and they had to keep them clean till wash day. Now, even in the hot summer, my skirts will go all the way to the floor and I'll wear my long sleeves. That's to protect against things like mosquito bites and sunburn, really even suntan. It was not in style back then. If I am going outside, I'll need to cover my head as well. And I could wear a nice big brimmed hat like Kevin has on, or better yet, women had their bonnets. Now this is the coolest bonnet. This one is called a slat bonnet. And if I put this on, it covers my face and shades my eyes. It covers my neck all the way around, and it's very fashionable. What's so funny? Oh, hi.
Could Jill see me over here? I don't think so. She looks kind of funny, doesn't it? Kind of looks like she's wearing a mailbox. All right? Can you see very wide on that, Jill?
Not very wide at all.
So, do you think that could ever be dangerous for her? Let's say that I'm going out to the field and I tell her, Jill, I want you to bring out the big team of oxen in about 30 minutes. Think of those oxen, those big cows that have the long horns. Well, what if one of them is having a bad day and he doesn't want to work and he's throwing his head around? Is she ever going to see that horn coming at her? Look at those long skirts that she's wearing. All right, let's say we're on our way out here to find our land, and we have to cross a deep river, and she falls out of the wagon. Do you think she can swim in that? A lot of the work that she's going to be doing, she's going to be doing it around an open fire. So she's moving around. Do you think we have stories of women who got their skirts too close to the fire? Absolutely. So sometimes this could even be a little dangerous for you. Well, we have some pictures of what you might have looked like if you were a pioneer child. Now, our first one here is if you were one of the girls. So take a close look at this picture. All right, we see 2 young girls with their mother. All right, and you can see they're wearing a lot of the same things that Jill just described. Now we'll take a look at the boys. Here's a picture of what you might have looked like if you were a young man out here on the prairie. Who do you think is cooler? Do you think the boys are cooler or the girls are cooler? Yeah, I'm not sure on this, but I'm glad I don't have to wear one of those long dresses. So, boys and girls, this was very hard to do. All right? But lots and lots of people tried it because they wanted to get that free land. In the United States, they think as many as 2 million people filed on free land under the Homestead Act. But less than half of them ever made it the 5 years and actually got their free land. All right, so you think about that. Less than half of them were able to actually do this. Also, by the 1930s, most of the land that they wanted to give away for free, they thought was gone. And so the Homestead Act really ended in the United States in the 1930s. But they think as much as 10% of our land was given away free under the Homestead Act. And remember, we had to pay that filing fee of just $18. So was it really free? Well, maybe not. But you have to think about living on your land for 5 years and making all the improvements that they wanted you to make. In 1880, They think the average homesteader may have spent around $2,500 to make those improvements. That would be like us spending over $40,000 today. So was the land free? Probably not. Well, we want to leave you with one last story today. And it's a story about what it was like to maybe grow up as a child out here on the prairie. Now, I think maybe for the kids, maybe you had a lot more fun out here on the prairie than maybe some of the adults were having. So let's listen to this last story from Jill about what it was like to grow up out here as a pioneer.
My brother Peter was my only playmate until I entered school. The summers passed rapidly for us. We had swings in the trees, we fished in the rainwater barrel, and we played in the sand. The winters, though, were longer. We romped in the snow when weather permitted. Inside the house, we played hide and seek and hide the thimble. We had slates to write on with colored chalk, but no coloring books or storybooks. Our main occupation was to study the Sears and Roebuck and the Montgomery Ward mail order catalogs. We spent hours choosing what we liked best in these look and wish books. Toys were few and far between. I recall my joy when Father brought me a curly white lamb on wheels from a large town he visited. Peter's gift was a small black horse on wheels. No money was wasted on the worthless toys of the day. Homemade clothing and store-bought shoes were our usual Christmas gifts. And the stocking that Peter and I hung by the hard coal heater on Christmas Eve was usually filled with red apple and homemade frosted cookies. My one and only doll received a new dress from Santa Claus every Christmas.
I think that sounds kind of fun. And maybe you do some of the same things that these kids did in the story. Do you dig in the dirt? Do you romp around in the snow? Do you like to swing, fish, play hide and seek? Well, they did some of those things back then too. Now that last thing I heard in there was something called the Look and Wish Book. Did you hear that too? Do you have an idea of what that might be? The Look and Wish Book was the Sears and Roebuck catalog. And I have a copy here of the 1897 Sears and Roebuck catalog. Everything you might need for your home is in this. There's farm machinery and hardware and tools. There's lots of things for the home, stoves, lamps, rugs. There's clothing. There's pocket watches. Anything you might want, you might find in here. The Look and Wish Book, Sears and Roebuck catalog, is kind of like Amazon is today. Now, I mentioned that sporting equipment in here. That might be something fun that you'd want to take a look at. Maybe some of you like to play baseball, and you'd like a brand new catcher's mitt. Well, if you look through here, you would find out that a Spalding boy's mitt in 1897 would cost you 20 cents. Oh, you think that's cheap? Oh, well then you want the top of the line. That would be the Spalding's Decker Patent Boys League mitt. That's going to cost you $1.80. Now those prices sound weird to us, don't they? Well, we know that the dollar went a little further back in 1897 than it does today. But let's think back to it again. Why would they have called this the Look and Wish Book? Maybe you got it. I think they would want to look through this, and boy, maybe they were going to wish for some of these things. But do you think they had the money to actually afford it? No, they probably didn't. So that's why it gets called the Look and Wish Book. And boys and girls, when I was your age, I used to look through a catalog just like this, especially at Christmas time, and I would circle all of the things that I wanted for Christmas. Well, boys and girls, this was a really tough time, but lots and lots of people did it, and maybe even some of your ancestors were pioneers who came out here to this area. We want to thank you so much for tuning in today and listening to our story of the pioneers. We hope you learned a lot more about the people who first came to this area. Thanks, everyone.